Hello and welcome to another episode of the Spielworxx Chat Season 3. My name is Uli Blennemann and I hope you are all well. And I have a wonderful guest today. It is James Naylor of Layla Games. Welcome, James. How are you?
Hello, I am excellent, Uli. Thank you very much.
This is good to hear, and we are having already some viewers here in the chat. Hello, Hans. Good seeing you. Hello, Detlef. I think it is. Good seeing you. And if you are having questions or comments today, please put them in the chat window, and James definitely will respond. Before we start, let me briefly mention that we are having, as Spielworxx, several games on our web store that are available or for pre-order, including Magnate. So please check them out if you are interested in them. But now back to you, James. James, what are you doing for a living? And the person, James Naylor, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Oh, what a big question. I try and tell me who I'm not sure I always know who I am. So I feel like obviously answering that question is always a big one. But let's start with the first one, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of what I'm doing for a living. So actually at the moment, my living is games, which is pretty much, I feel like, is the dream, right? Is that if you get to make games and you get to live from them, that's great. So that's what I'm doing right now. But that's actually a really recent thing for me. So until recently, my main kind of business was really in software. And particularly from the kind of product management side of things. So my job I used to do was I was the head of basically the product department of an advertising technology company, well, a couple of different advertising technology companies, and I would run that and the engineering side. And so if people are kind of familiar with what a product management, what that is that you're often the layer between the rest of the business and the engineering team. So you're defining what a software product should be, how it's going to address its market, what its route to market will be, defining the features, this kind of thing, and you give the kind of engineering team its direction to actually build it. So that's what I was doing recently, and in the last few years, while I've been building up Layla Games, I have been doing little bits of consulting work here or there, doing brief contracts, doing that kind of work for different companies. But it's only recently that I've now kind of tried to put that down completely so that I can focus purely on games. And now that we've got Magnate selling really well, that is becoming a reality, which is really cool.
Very good. Yeah, very good. Yeah, in some ways, it's definitely a dream, working in the gaming industry. But maybe later we will talk about a little bit about some problems of a small publisher. But I think the start of Layla Games is very, very good. James, personally, are you a long-time gamer? And which type of games are you preferring? What is your preference here?
Oh, it's a really interesting question because I feel like the more things I've tried, the more things I like. But so certainly, yeah, very much long-time gamer. I think, firstly, like many people, as a child, I really loved board games. I used to make board games as well as a child. I'd create them. Including one time I had to go out trying to make a board game about the cathedrals of medieval England. That was something I created where you could. The idea would be you'd be like a bishop and you'd have a diocese. You'd have competing dioceses. That was kind of my idea of it. And I made these different games. But I think also, like a lot of people, especially my age, I then got into kind of computer games. I stopped really playing board games at all until university. And then a friend of mine introduced me to, I think it was maybe Carcassonne was the first thing that we played, and it was this sort of modern game. Particularly from this particular wave of games coming at the time out of Germany, or had recently in the previous 10 years or so. And I was playing it and just thinking, this is great. This is so much better than a lot of the games I remember, just with how fast and fluid this was. And I just started getting really, really into games. And a particular friend of mine was really into them. And we used to go to this lovely little shop on the Cowley Road in Oxford, little board game store, run by this elderly couple who just sold just hobby games and nothing else. I think they owned this place, so that this has been about 2006, I think, maybe approximately. So they would needed to have owned it because I'm sure this business wasn't hugely profitable. But they obviously loved hobby games, and we used to go there to buy loads of things there, including for me probably the game that sealed it for me, which was Martin Wallace's Railroad Tycoon.
Okay.
And I played this game. I think it's now called Railways of the World, and I loved it. It was just like this wonderfully ambitious mixture of economics and this just wonderful thing about just building railway lines, this amazingly, wonderfully overproduced game in some ways. And I thought, I fell in love with it. And from that point onwards, I just got really, really into games. And then I found myself just getting back into them. And within a few years, I sort of started thinking, I want to make my own, design my own board games. And that's how I got to designing Magnate, which I think I first wrote the first rules for in 2011.
Okay, so a long time ago, but not that long after you discovered. A couple of years after you rediscovered modern gaming. So interesting. And exactly. Hello, Joe's 3D. Hello, good seeing you. So you said, James. So basically, you play all types of games.
Yeah, I would say it's really interesting. I would certainly say I definitely have a taste in the sense of there are certain things that I know I'm going to really like or not like most of the time. But I think it's what it is. I find it's probably not so much genre related. So, for example, there are some party games that I really enjoy. For example, I can think about, I just played recently Just One. I don't know if that's one that you've played. And I think it's just such a wonderfully stripped down example of like a party game. If that's the right context, I really enjoy that. One thing I really like is games that, if it's outside of that very pure social context, then I know what I'm looking for is generally things that have got a lot of theme and things that feel like they're not dripping with theme, or there's like a lack of there's a bit of a mechanical thematic disconnect. I find those generally don't vibe with me very much.
Yeah.
And I also find what it does mean is interesting is that there are quite a lot of, it's interesting, it's kind of become more of a genre than I think it used to be, of like the contemporary Euro game, where some of them, they may be very well designed from a mechanical perspective, but they lack either something a bit innovative or they don't recall the theme sufficiently well for me. And then I find those a bit tedious. So I think it's been really interesting to sort of explore as time has gone by how my taste has evolved. And I think theme and bringing theme to life is just like a really important thing for me.
Yeah, same with me. So, I cannot agree more. So for me, theme is very important. And if the mechanics are then support the theme, then it's in my opinion, the best gaming experience. And hello, board game for me. Good seeing you too. And so, at a certain point, you founded Naylor Games. You found Naylor Games. So what was the reason to found it? So of course we know you were working on Magnate already, but you could have said, well, this is my game, let's pitch it to other companies. Why found your own company?
So it's really interesting. So I kind of by 2016, 2017, I was kind of working on Magnate, and I'd got it to a point where it finally was starting to play satisfactorily. Like the games were I think it had reached a stage where it was functional and fun, but it still had so much further to go. But I'd reached this point, and I was thinking, maybe I'll get someone to publish it, and maybe I'll see if I can pitch it to publishers. And I started reading up the process of it and going through it, and I started actually emailing a couple of publishers as well. And I suddenly realized, the more I thought about it, it was like, oh my God, this is going to be a very long process getting this published. And actually, two things I've always wanted to do is A, run my own business, and B, I actually have a huge amount of product experience. And I think I realized that probably compared to a lot of people, like the commercial side of bringing things to market, thinking about marketing, budgeting, financing, all of these things and bringing them all together was something I'd actually had a lot of professional experience of. And I was like, well, hang on then. I would actually, if it's successful, I'd get more money out of it, for starters. B, I think I'd probably enjoy the process. And C, I have the skills to do this. So I thought, you know what? Let's go down the self-publish route and give it a go. And for me, that felt much more like the right way to do it as a bucket list thing. Because it was like, at that point, by the way, I want to be clear, I hadn't really thought if we would publish any more games other than Magnate. I was like, well, let's see how this goes, see how enjoyable the process really is. If it's excellent, then, then maybe we'll be doing more, but maybe this will be a one and done thing and I'll be off and do something else. Like I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but whether it would be this would be the right industry to be in, I honestly didn't know at that point. But then the more I did the process behind the scenes, I started to realize I really enjoyed most parts of it. And I think I enjoy parts of it that other people don't enjoy. So, for example, one of the big things I'm pretty good at is constructing systems in general. So one of the things I quite enjoy is like, this terribly. I mean, this is nerdy even for us gamers. I really enjoy building out the fulfillment system that we have that automates like how we do shipments, how we stay in contact with retailers, how we move goods around the world, and building all of those systems up. I can build them pretty effectively and quickly. So for me, it was like, oh, I'm pretty good at that bit. I enjoy quite a lot of the marketing bit around the marketing strategy. I actually love to get, down and dirty with a spreadsheet and work out the financing and think about business model and optimization, all this kind of thing. And I thought, oh, really? I'm like 50% interested in games and 50% interested in business. And I feel like this is a really good, nice blend to have to be in this role, because both bits of it are keeping you going and motivated. So for that reason, I thought, as I was enjoying it and we started looking at other games we could publish or make, I was like, this is really fun, actually. This could just be a good thing to build a career on. And I think particularly as I started to see the financial success of other companies, I look at something like a Stonemaier Games. And I think it's great when Jamie releases that data every year, because every day I punch the air for him, because I'm just like, it's possible to make a very, very healthy business out of this, and you can build something potentially really fantastic, and even with quite a small product range. So I thought, well, let's go for that. Let's really give this a go. And that's kind of when it went from found a company just to get Magnate published and have limited product liability and all that kind of thing, to no, actually, let's build a game business and think about what we're about, maybe more long term.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And if you and of course, you just put the capital N into nerd when you were saying that you love the fulfillment part of the business and all this and love spreadsheets. So you are a nerd, James. But no, if this is what you like, then it's of course a perfect combination. And hello, Ben. Hello to California. Good seeing you here in your morning. Hans, your question, let's, I think this is a good moment here. So Hans is asking, James, what was the inspiration for Magnate, the first city? Good question at this moment.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think, to be honest, it's one of those really interesting things where it was several things kind of came together at once. So a big part of it was that I've always been a huge fan of SimCity type video games. So I always enjoyed those. They were great fun. The pivotal bit for me was SimCity 4. That was the apex of the series. And people may notice that actually quite explicitly, when we were doing the art direction and mood boarding for Magnate, we chose a color palette that was like the menus of SimCity 4, because I knew that there were probably other people out there who had this nostalgic kind of memory for this particular game. It was the kind of pinnacle of the series, I think, in many ways, particularly from a complexity perspective as well. I love that. And I actually always unironically very much enjoyed Monopoly when I was younger. And even when I lost horribly, I still kind of enjoyed the theme of the whole game. And it sort of struck me that I was just like, well, why isn't there like a true gamer Monopoly? Right? Why isn't there something that takes that thematic thing and goes, well, okay, but what are all the cool things that we know about modern games now that we could do very differently? How could we have something that was based on real world property economics? And the other big influence had been that I had been, for various complex reasons, been very involved in my local area in the property world, specifically around talking to developers. As for a brief while, I was running a newspaper, and I was quite involved in networking with other different people. There was a lot of redevelopment going on in my town of Croydon, in my area, and I thought there was a lot I learned about how property markets worked and how city kind of planning worked. And I thought, well, we could integrate all these ideas. There seems like something that would be a city building experience that would be based on property economics. And particularly it all sort of came together because I was like, well, that it would feel natural for you to be a property developer in this game, because actually the way that cities develop is actually quite organic. And it would be good to recreate this. So all of these ideas all kind of came together, and I thought, right, that's it. It's got to be a kind of game of Monopoly that's a property development game that would be based on cool but real world nerdy things like how property cities work. And that really and then suddenly very quickly most of the cool concepts all solidified together within the case of like a week or less, and the proximate form of the game you see today in rough outlines kind of existed.
Very good. So yeah, it makes all sense to me. Although compared to Monopoly, I'm missing the dice in Magnate. So that was maybe you should have added them to the game, or maybe not. And hello, Blue Day, good seeing you. So Magnate is of course, James. It's a very typical city building game. So we have seen this 50 times before, right? So. No, what, James, what makes Magnate really special? Because, of course, I love this game. So I think it's a wonderful design. It's a wonderful game, a wonderful product also from the product design perspective. And we will get to this, of course, in a couple of minutes. But what makes Magnate special?
So I think the first thing is that which to pick up on a theme is really important, is that it is a city building from the private developer's perspective. So you are not building a city because you are a mayor and you're sort of an omniscient mayor and you're choosing where buildings go. You're thinking, right, there's this amazing boom going on in this city, right? And that's already another difference. It's like it has a very tight arc and very specifically about the idea of a kind of rapid, almost deranged property boom that you're trying to profit off. And you want to get in there and you want to make the most money. But the way that you make money is through exploiting how cities work. So, you want your development to be connected to all the right things, to be near, if you're building a big office development, you want to have be easy for lots of workers to come in to work at your office. That's really important geographical consideration. You also want to be near other, conveniences. You want to be near you want to be near nice restaurants and shops and access to amenities. You have to think, as a developer does, about what makes a good site and then what's the right thing for that site. And sort of none of the city buildings games I've come across are really as interested in this very individual perspective where you are battling over it. And then what this means is you get something really cool, which I've always been really interested in, which is which is emergent phenomena. So I really want to see the city be realistically created by the players' realistic motivations. So for me, it's like, well, the reason the city looks like a real city at the end is because, well, it follows the same rule set and principles that real cities do. Yes. So it's like, well, the nearer you are to other things, the more valuable the land gets. This becomes a really important principle. And I just felt like there was nothing in city building that really reflected this perspective of this whole angle into this really very much at all. And then lots of things you have, and this is like a really fundamental thing that I decided I was very firm on from the beginning. A lot of city building games are what's called stacking games. And someone even contacted me recently and they said, you're making a stacking game. And I said, I am absolutely not making a stacking game. I said, that's not how buildings work. They don't incrementally get bigger. You build them once and that's it. If you want a new building, in fact, people often ask in Magnate, can I upgrade my building? And sometimes if I was feeling more charitable, I go, oh, no, you can't do that. Or I'd say, or I'll just ask them the question right back and say, well, can you upgrade a building in real life? Like, kind of. You can stick an extension on it. But you can't, turn a house into an apartment building. You have to knock the house down. So this is another thing that I felt like I wanted to get away from, that idea that felt like a more inheritance of very abstract gameplay, and move it back into this real world property economics kind of space. So and then that logically just led to, well, if you're going to do that, you want realistic buildings. So they're not highly abstracted, but they're just really nice miniatures. Because I felt, again, like city buildings, it seemed very weird to me. There were very few city builders that had really nice buildings in. And I thought, well, we're in an age now where there is an increasing market for games that have very high production values. Why can't we have a city builder where we build really nice, real buildings?
Yeah.
Rather than just sort of everything being flat.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And I can really say and state that on the table, Magnate looks magnificent. So it's really well built. The miniatures look really good. And as James said, even on your game table, your city seems to expand really in an organic way, so it all makes sense. And hello, Andre, good seeing you. The Chardonnay Mafia has entered the room, so very good. And there's a good question. If I hate, Detlef is asking, if I hate Monopoly, will I love or like Magnate?
I think, in the very least, you'll like Magnate. A really important thing for me was I wanted to recreate a few of the thematic pleasures of Monopoly that I had enjoyed as a child. So I was thinking about, like, for me, that's why paper money was a bit of a controversial choice, but was really important in this game. Was because I wanted the feeling of, grabbing wadges of cash and carefully how you spend it and seeing your wealth pile up, right? And I wanted you to physically place things, to feel like you were building an empire. But outside of that, really, I had no interest in replicating anything mechanically from that. And I wanted to make something where you wouldn't have this really nasty zero-sum thing where, and also just some classical, which I think today you could reasonably just regard as game design mistakes, like the runaway leader problem. You need to work out subtle ways of baking in a system that reduces runaway leader effects, that crafts a game that's a lot more about strategy and a lot less about chance. So I think if you're someone who you kind of like the thematic appeal of those things, of making money, of property, but you hate the mechanics and you want something that's much more strategic and tight and rewarding of skill, then I think Magnate's a really good game.
Yeah,
from that perspective.
I agree, and really the game has, apart from the theme, almost nothing to do with Monopoly.
No.
So it's a completely different game. And I just posted the link to the Board Game Geek page of the game, so you can appreciate in all the pictures that are there how it looks on the table. So really, really lovely production value. And so I'm new to Magnate, but I don't want to really read a rules booklet, although the rules are pretty concise. It's not a 50-page rules booklet, but I'm coming late in the day to my gaming table. I don't want to read the rules. I'm open the box. So how does the game help me to get into the game, James?
Well, and this is the thing that I'm maybe one of the things I'm proudest of about it is the tutorial mode that it comes with. So kind of one of the things I spent a long time thinking about, and or rather it's an idea that constantly I do think about a lot, is about how one of the principal points of friction that stop people playing games are rules. Now, there are some of us who love reading a rule book and will be happily almost enjoy the process of like discovering a new game, reading all this, I wonder how that's going to work, and I wonder how that's going to come to life, and I might read that. But actually, I think for the majority of people, that's just the thing you have to go through to get to playing the game, and it stops people from just getting in and playing something. Especially when you've got something like Magnate, which kind of, I think it looks a bit more threatening than it is, because it has so many components. You look at it and go, woof, that's a lot. But actually, it's more of a medium weight game. So, but a deep medium weight game. And I kind of feel like it was therefore really important to get people over the hump and go, well, look, tell you what, you don't have to read any rules at all. You could just unseal a deck of cards, and then you could your first game is your learning game. And I was partly inspired watching people like Paul Grogan teach games at conventions and being really good at breaking down the steps and going, well, I'm only going to tell you what you need to know now to learn the game. And because he's got a very authoritative manner when he's teaching a game, you trust him. And I wanted something in the game that you could trust to go, don't worry, I'm going to make sure you know all the right stuff at the right times. And you never need to spend time. You have to tell it's that awful thing before a game night. We're like, can everyone make sure they've read the rule book, or please watch the 25-minute watch it played video before you turn up to what is ultimately a social evening of entertainment. To ask people to do loads of prep is it's a lot, right? So that's such a key barrier to games. It's if the idea you could say, no, you just unseal this thing and you get playing and by the end of your first game, you know the game really well, and you're meaningfully strategizing. That to me would seem a huge advantage.
Yes.
I think it was seeing the thing that really finalized it for me was seeing the tutorials of Fog of Love and playing that and just being not actually overwhelmed by it in terms of execution, because I think it was an early example of this. And it could have been a lot better in some ways, but very impressed by the thought process they'd put into turning it into this learning, teaching game is the same thing. And I thought, we got to do this, because this game, it has several quite novel mechanics, and they're not exactly hard but they're, like many big heavy Euros have 40 different, or maybe 10 or 20 different mini systems, and they're all kind of familiar, but there's loads of them.
Yeah.
Whereas Magnate is much more like a game that has 2 or 3 chunky, quite novel systems. And so again, that thing of having the game teach you it seemed like it would be good, because it would get people over that hump in a way that a game that just uses more familiar mechanics might not need to do the same degree of hand-holding.
Yeah, absolutely. And hello, Nick. By the way, good seeing you. Yeah, I can fully confirm this because when I opened the box, and normally I hate these abridged rules booklets. Let's start now. But here it's completely different. It's a full set of cards, and you flip the card and go along. And you can even discuss with your friend, and the cards even tell you, please discuss what is the best solution or what do you think will come up. So it's really well made, and after you've done this, you are in the game. So really wonderful, and you are playing your first game while doing so. So it's not reading the cards, you are playing your first full game. So really well done. And of course, James, in these days in the pandemic, more and more games have a solo mode, or lots of gamers love to play a game solitaire. How is Magnate achieving this? How is the solo mode of Magnate?
So that's also really interesting. So this was an amazingly interesting process to design first, because I would only done a little bit of solo gaming myself. So I think compared to my rest of my gaming experience, I was less experienced. And the one of the things that straight away occurred to me about designing it was I wanted a solo mode that would feel more like playing a human opponent. Mm-hmm. So I think in the early days of solo modes, a lot of things were very it's a difficult balance. All solo design has this balance of administration and kind of simulation. Mm-hmm. And so the administration element of them was kept very minimal, but then the simulation didn't feel like playing against a human opponent. So I thought, well, could we go have the reason we call it in the booklet the AI mode, mm-hmm. Is because we thought, well, could we have a complete robot player, much like the kind of Automa stuff that I think came from like the second version of Viticulture, and some of the Stonemaier games incorporate this stuff really early. Was like, could we get a mode? And then that way, what you get to do as well, if let's say you're a couple and you just want to play it 2 players, well, you get to have the 3-player experience, because you could add an AI mode in that would also work in multiplayer. And actually, we've had several people, including there was one video in the US where they said, oh, you absolutely have to play it if you're 2 players with the solo mode, because it adds so much having this bot that's doing stuff that gives this extra player for the 2 other players to riff off. Was wonderful to see that. Some people feel it's almost essential when they're playing it. I don't agree, actually, because I love Magnate at 2 players, and anyone says to me even today, after insane amounts of playtesting, wants to say, "Hey, you want to game of Magnate?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'm up for it." But actually, but for some people it's great, because they get to add this extra player, another interaction, and they get something closer to the high player count experience at the same time as being a very challenging solo bot. And I wonder a little bit if actually we tuned it almost a bit too hard for solo mode, because the highest difficulty levels, we kind of figured that the people who would get really into it solo would want to have a real challenge. And I would say even on normal difficulty is maybe above the curve in terms of average for solo games. And then the higher levels of difficulty, I think the main difficulty, I forget what that one's called. It's called generalized AI, I think is what it's called. The next one's called Robot Overlord, and then the highest one is the Singularity. And I think that one I feel is deliberately very, very hard to beat. I don't know if anyone has ever beaten it. I think Jaya, my developer, has beaten it on one occasion. And I remember, I think, yes, he did. And he remember he texting me and saying, "James, I finally beat the Singularity," which was just a great text to read. So that's, but it does mean, I think what I like about it is it gives a lot of very robust play. And I have played it myself quite a few times, the solo mode, as well as Jaya's ceaseless development on it, because it gives you a more rich, I think, experience than quite a lot of games do, in terms of really you're facing off against a human-like opponent.
Yeah, very good. And I think it's important to repeat that it's not only a solo mode, but that you can introduce it in small player count games as another player for more interaction. I think very well done. And of course, you now all have to write, James, that you beat Magnate in solo mode at the highest difficulty level. So it should work out.
I want to hear this. I want to hear about your battles with the Singularity.
And there is Daniel, good seeing you, and he's asking, will there be a wrecking ball truck promo, and how much Prosecco is it gonna cost me? Prosecco stays here because I have to drink it. But James, Wrecking Ball truck promo, I don't think so. Oh?
Maybe, I don't know. Like, there's interestingly in the Tycoon expansions that we did, which we're thinking about re-releasing broadly as a more broad product. There is an employee card that lets you do a demolition expert that does let you demolish things and rebuild them more efficiently than normal. So maybe there's something in that. Maybe the Wrecking Ball promo. If it could be as delightful as our first player marker of the Little Digger, then absolutely.
Yeah, so let's see. So good question here. But in Magnate, like in some other games, you win by having the most money at the end of the game. So far, so good. But how does Magnate build up tension? I'm just mentioning one word, crash. What does it mean, and how is this handled in the game?
So this is really, really important. So it kind of felt to me like making a game about property had to also be about property market crashes. And the reason for me...
And James, I just interrupt you because at the same time, I have a very good question here. Sorry for interrupting you.
Yes, no,
because there is this question. I learned Magnate has a built-in market crisis. If yes, is this a critique to capitalism? So please integrate this in your response, James.
Oh, very much.
Wonderful question.
It's a perfectly timed question as well. I love it. Great. So yes, exactly. So it felt like I had to problem, and that's because there were two reasons really. One, it feels like actually that's inherent fluctuations like that are inherent to markets in general. So that's like a really important thing I wanted to talk about. And secondly, it's the most obvious way to drive drama, because one of the things, again, talking about my interest in games, I love games that have drama in them. One of the reasons that I loved Railway Tycoon and why I got so into it, and I think that was a big influence on Magnate, I would say one of the biggest from a mechanical perspective, I think, of many of the games that I've played, is that that has this auction that is so incredibly critical that it's very high stakes. And I think auctions can be really effectively moments of drama. And I thought, well, what would be really dramatic, what would be even more dramatic, would be if there's this property market crash where we're all participating in this boom and prices are high, but there's a chance that, or rather at some point, the party's going to end. And prices are going to come crashing down. And if you've guessed the market wrong, you're going to potentially lose loads of money. And this is great because it means everyone sat around the table being like, oh, when's it going to happen? It's like an enormous push your luck mechanic, where you really are trying to judge the right time to exit the market. And this is really important because, that's like the soul of, it felt like that was almost like the soul of the idea. It felt like it had to be that, like the game was talking to me and it said, I've got to have a crash because that's just what this has to be about. And what it means is that it gives this marvelous drama where then the players are trying to work out when the right exit point is. But they're also, and this was the really tough thing to engineer in the game, and maybe it was the most complex piece of development to get right, but they could also influence it a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we have this property market in the game where I'll just very briefly describe the mechanics here because I think they'll be useful for the explanation, which is that prices are generally rising each turn. They can be rising faster or slower depending on what players are doing. So if players sell a lot of property at once, that would push the market up faster, or they're hyping the market by advertising, that would increase the pace at which it rises. But at the same time, there's also a crash track, which is being moved by these risk cards. That means that the behaviors that the market would be bad for the market, like no one doing any advertising, or no one selling, or people selling too much, all of those things would introduce this kind of risk into the market that could push it closer and closer to a crash. So it was really important that you had these two processes going on. We're all getting terribly excited, but at the same time, we're constantly increasing the risk of this total market collapse. And on some level, we don't care, right? Because we want to get in, we want to make as much money as possible and then get out. But actually, we don't want to be the one who gets burned after the market crash. So this was a really important source of drama. The other reason why it was so burdensome in terms of development is because then what we actually had to do was make the game fairer, so that the crash feels really intense, but actually the differences between the players aren't so stark that the whole thing will come down to the crash. So I think Dan Thurr described this really well, that the reason why he felt the mechanic worked is that you still all have to play really well. If you play poorly, you're still not going to win. but you've got more of a there's like a little bit of margin where, depending on how well you're playing, the crash could be really important, but it's not on its own going to win you or lose you the game, but it's still going to feel really intense. And I think that was a really important balance to get right. And is it a critique of capitalism? Absolutely. I think one of the things that I really wanted to do with the game was explore this. I had been really influenced by a lot of, partly by the history of Monopoly, interesting enough, where it had started as a satirical game created as the landlord's game, right? Where often quite a lot of them know about this history. And I wanted to create something that it felt very much in the spirit of it, to have something that was a little bit satirical, but also wouldn't hit people over the head with it. Because I think the problem with very satirical games are that if you are playing the bad guy and you're being told you're the bad guy all along and it's slapped in your face constantly, it can be challenging for people not just like have a lot less fun with it. So there's this tightrope walk of like, well, I want to play with this and I want people to think about this and I want to explore this theme, but I also don't want to bludgeon people over the head by saying, look, this is bad. And I think more anyway, I would say it's more like, I'd like to think, well, maybe not this is so bad or good, but this is what it is to some extent. It's kind of what it's trying to do, I think.
Yeah, very, very good explanation here, James. And in the chat, I've posted the link to Dan Thoreau's review here, so you can read this as well. And Dan is really liking the game too. Yeah, and in my opinion, first to repeat this a little bit. The crash in the game, it really is very dramatic. So the drama is there. So this is a wonderful, even from a gaming, just from a gaming point of view, it's a wonderful mechanism. Second, is it a critique of capitalism? I would say definitely yes. So I'd agree here. But it's also, you could also just say it's a description of parts of capitalism, because every one of us is, at least at a certain point, is greedy, wants to be more famous, wants to have more money, wants to be there, and wants to achieve this. And in the game, when the prices are rising constantly, you're saying, yes, I'm making it, I'm achieving something, I'm getting better. So everybody is feeling this, but nobody wants to be the one that is losing out hard, but just what is the right moment to get out of it. So I think this is really what sets Magnate apart from other games. I'm not saying that the rest is boring or standard type stuff, not at all. But this is really an outstanding mechanism. And frankly, I have to say, and we can briefly mention this, that Magnate now will be done again in English language. It will be done again anew in Korean language, and it will be done anew in German language by Spielworxx. This was the decisive factor why I'm saying this is a game for Spielworxx. So really, I have to applaud you here, James. Very, very well done. But having mentioned this, everything looks good here. New editions are coming out. Are there any problems a small publisher is facing these days, or can you briefly mention this, or if you want to do so?
Well, also, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I like to do on my podcast is talk a bit about the troubles of producing things. So I've got a podcast called Producing Fun, and that where I interview different people in the game industry, all about what their role is, and particularly people who are not designers. And I've only interviewed one person who's just a game designer so far, and that's not because I hate game designers, because I love talking to them. They're fascinating. To be really clear, it's just because there's like loads of other industry roles, and I think. One of the things that you just encounter a lot, and I've spoken quite a lot of publishers now already, and is that it is very challenging. It's a very challenging environment. As a small publisher, you're exposed to a lot of risk, right? Because, right now we have one title in the market. We don't have any more than that. We have loads on the way. We might talk about those in a minute. But We have one title in market. It kind of has to succeed. And if it doesn't succeed, well, that's quite difficult. That's our only product. So it's got to work. So that's an issue. Right now, we're facing some very particular issues. Obviously, everyone's being hit and is hurting from inflation. But what's happened to us is like been astronomical in certain sectors. Like something which obviously I don't need to tell you about is the price of shipping. I mean, we're the only economic place to make Magnate is in China, and that's because of the fact that it's a mixture of lots of plastic components as well as card, and that means that we had to pay last year container prices that were 8 times what they had been, 7 to 8 times what they had been previously to move the same goods. So I think I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but effectively, all the shipping costs we had increased by 7 to 8 times. And suddenly this project that was actually looking very financially really good and I was really happy with was like, oh, well, suddenly that's all gone. And it was extraordinary to see this once in a generation supply chain crisis just hit in a way that I think people are kind of more aware of. Maybe they've been reading the news, but when you're at the brunt of that, is extraordinarily difficult to suddenly just take that kind of impact. So that's a big challenge as well. And I think, and also I think there's just a broad challenge that everyone has from a marketing perspective, which is just getting word about your games out there. There are so many games coming out, and actually there are so many really good games coming out. Like we live in a bit of a golden age in many ways, but that makes it very difficult for small publishers sometimes to be heard, right? Because the next big Asmodee release, people will know about it because it'll be everywhere. Difficult, much more difficult for small publishers. So they've all got that going for them. On the other hand, I would say, is I like to think of, in the nicest possible way, I'm going to use this word, in the nicest possible way, I think some small publishers can also be a bit like cockroaches. Yeah. And what I mean by this is that we can survive kind of an atomic blast. Because if you have quite a low cost base and you don't already have 50 employees and loads of people to pay and those sort of things, you can actually also survive those things. And I think in this crisis, in somewhat, I sort of feel glad to have been through this a bit. Because it means, well, I know myself now. Well, if we can prosper in this environment, then we can probably prosper even more in a more challenging environment. So I think from that perspective, it's tough. It's really tough for every small publisher right now. But I think those of us who are very small, like myself and some of my colleagues who increasingly around Croydon, who've got several games companies here, have the advantage of, well, we've only known this world, and we don't. If we screw up, it's not like the consequence for like 50 people's jobs or something. Yeah. So I think, so it's always swings and roundabouts, I think, from that perspective.
Yeah, and now we have a new slogan as well. So Layla Games and Spielworxx, the cockroaches of gaming. So should immediately go to the websites, and I love it. And hello Matze, good seeing you here. Spieletreffen-Verteiler. But James, to finish this off here, can you already let us know something about future titles that you will do, or if you have some hints?
Yes, absolutely. So, there's one of them we're going to start talking about again. We've taken it to a few game expos and things as well already, and it's been going down really well. And we're going to be releasing the new artwork very soon for it, which I'm super proud of, which is our new game, which is currently titled Board Games, the Board Game, the Card Game. So,
okay.
This is a very, very different project to Magnate. The sort of, I think, the thread that I realized that runs through all of the things in our pipeline is that they're all ambitious in some way. Mm-hmm. And Magnate was a pretty ambitious first release because of production complexity and what it was trying to do. I think it is generally pretty innovative, and took a long many years to get it to where it is today. We want to do something that was equally ambitious in a different way. So, Board Games, the Board Game, the Card Game is a light card game / party game. In which, so very, very different to Magnate, but in which you are a game designer making 3 different games and then pitching one of those games to your friends and selling them on why it's the best game possible. Mm-hmm. And you take these different idea cards, and what we thought we'd do is like, well, could we create something that would be like a celebration of hobby games? So it's got like something like 120 idea cards, 70 different game themes, and then we have got, for each theme, a kind of archetypal box cover for each one of those themes, which then we have had created in a unique art style. Wow. So this is probably, from an artistic perspective, even more ambitious than Magnate in terms of execution, even if the components are massively simpler, because this is going to be a light game that's a small box thing. But it will be beautiful. And I wanted to create something that was a celebration of hobby games in general, and would let people, I know a lot of people in the hobby world, like I feel like almost everyone now, they used to have a screenplay in their desk, and now they have a board game design. And I feel like today that would be a wonderful way to play in that world, sort of celebrate existing games. So we're going to be talking more about that soon, releasing the new artwork soon. I want to bring that to Kickstarter later this year. And I think that should be tremendous fun, both because it's a funny fusion of a kind of more Euro side points optimization game, and then this sort of slightly wacky party game in one. And I think that's going to be great fun when we get that out there. And it's certainly, so far, whenever we play with anyone, it's been going down really well.
So I'm really curious about this one. Sounds interesting, different, and really, really fun. And in the meantime, people, please check out the Layla Games website for more news on this game. Check out when the new edition of Magnate in English language is out. You can already pre-order the German edition from the Spielworxx website, and there will be also a Korean language edition of Magnate, the first city. So this is really great. And James, thank you so much for your time today. This was really a pleasure having you here. How can people best reach you?
So best thing to do, so if you ever want to reach me for any reason, you could just email me at james@naylagames.com. And then also I'm available on Twitter as well. Want a conversation on Twitter? I am at Layla James. Our official company account is at Play Layla Games, if you want to check that one out as well. That's really the best ways. We're also on Instagram and Facebook. You'll find us, type in Layla Games, or Play Layla Games. You'll find us pretty quickly there. So any of those avenues really is a good way to get hold of me.
Yeah, very, very good. People will reach you. And there's Jay Foolscott. He's thanking you so for your time here, and I have to thank you too. And I have to thank you. I have to give my thank you to all viewers. Thanks a lot. And next week, because I want to move finally to a bi-weekly schedule, I've promised this so many times, and then it's weekly again. But next week there is really no Spielworxx chat, so next one is on May the 3rd. Thank you again for your time. If you have an idea for a topic, a question that you'd like to ask in advance, just drop me a mail at uli@spielworxx.de. It is uli@spielworxx.de, and I will definitely respond. So till May the 3rd, bleibt alle gesund, support the Ukraine, and bye-bye. Bye.